Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Growth in the music industry, brought to you by streaming. Hello and welcome to Advanced Studio Classroom. I am your host, Joe, and for this month, August, our entertainment article is all about streaming and different kinds of streaming services that we have. And as you know, some of my panels, I like to bring in the experts, people who really know what they're talking about. And so I've brought in my usual set of extreme experts, starting with Josh. Josh, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Joe. Always good to be here, and thank you for that very flattering introduction.
Oh, and then also another wonderful expert. She's very good with technical information, financial, biology, anything that you could think of. Rebecca.
That's very kind. I'm very happy to be back.
And actually, I know a lot of times we joke about you guys being the experts, but I do say that, in this kind of article set where we're talking about streaming services and I think, digital media, I think the two of you have a lot to offer to this kind of conversation for our listeners, both in terms of how you guys operate with Haoxiang and some of the stuff we do online. So I think actually the next 2 days, my friends, you're going to get a lot of really good insights from Josh and Rebecca. So both days we're going to be looking at streaming, different kinds of streaming services in different kinds of industries. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on streaming music. And so to get this whole article started, I wanted to ask our panelists, how do you listen to music? Josh, how do you listen to music?
Well, it's a very good question. It really depends on where I'm at. So for music, I will use YouTube to listen to a lot of my music. I will also use some streaming services like Spotify. But then I also have a lot of music that I've purchased over the years and have changed from CD into a digital file. So I have a lot of saved music as well that then I will save on my phone or on various MP3 players. So it really kind of depends on the situation.
On the situation. How about you, Rebecca? Do you have any vinyls floating around?
Actually, no, because when we moved some years ago, we did not bring most of our vinyl records with us. I actually have some similarity with Josh. I do listen to a lot of music on YouTube. So I think YouTube is my go-to for listening to music, especially newer music. I have some songs I bought on iTunes in the past, but when we're talking about this topic, it's actually kind of interesting. If I really think about it, I have not bought any new song on iTunes for over a year.
Oh.
So maybe I'm in one of the percentile of those people who are not buying music, as in traditional forms of music. Even traditionally on digital, you would just buy a song you like on iTunes, or if you're on Android, on Google Play Store.
Right. And so there are actually a lot of really interesting shifts, I think, that are happening in the music industry. And confessions here, I also usually just use YouTube to listen to music. It's hard to beat YouTube, especially if you're not really willing to spend money on music, which
Right.
I'm more than willing to go to a concert.
Right.
I'm more than willing to buy those kinds of tickets and things like that. But there's something about the ease of access that I really enjoy. Well, we're going to be looking more at the numbers and the market that comes with all these different streaming services for music. So we're going to take a look at that with our first reading.
A streaming revolution. New technology is changing the way we are entertained. RIAA says 50 million listeners paid for music streaming last year. Paid subscriptions to music streaming services hit a new high in 2018, topping 50 million for the first time and contributing strongly to an overall revenue increase of 12% over the previous year. According to the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA. Consumers' use of streaming through paid subscriptions rose 33% over 2017. Streaming services collected nearly $4.7 billion in revenue, up from $3.5 billion in 2014. The RIAA said, "Tremendous output from the artist community fueled a historic milestone of 50 million subscriptions to music services, which in turn helped drive U.S. music's third consecutive year of double-digit growth," RIAA Chairman and CEO Mitch Glazier said in a statement. "Rejuvenation in the industry means more opportunities to find and break new artists for fans to enjoy," Glazier said.
So right off the bat, we have this abbreviation, RIAA. And the RIAA says 50 million listeners paid for music streaming last year. And while that number in and of itself, I think, is, really significant, you see the sort of growth that's happening. What's RIAA, Josh?
Well, that would be the Recording Industry Association of America.
And this particular group, it's always really interesting to look at different associations. I think one of the last articles the three of us did together, we were looking at a lighting association. It was like Electric Lights of America Association or something interesting like that. There's an association for everything in the United States, I feel like. But what RIAA does, they basically work on protecting intellectual properties for record labels. They do research into trends with the music industry. They also tend to monitor regulations and new laws that could potentially affect the music industry. But the RIAA is basically, they represent something like 85% of the music industry in some form or another. It's a really significant, large group. And so they're looking at the numbers, and they're noticing that there's been some changes with paid subscriptions to music streaming services. And this is apparently a new high, Rebecca.
Yeah, 50 million is actually a pretty big number because when you think about the population of the United States, which is about, 300 million?
I think so.
Around 300 million?
A little bit over, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that would be about 1 in 6 people are subscribing to some sort of music service online.
And this apparently led to an overall revenue increase.
Right, of 12% over the previous year, which is, when you're looking at sales, that's a big jump.
Right. I know in some ways, like a number like 12% doesn't seem significant, but actually, I think like Josh is mentioning, it's a really big jump. It's a good increase. And so we also have these sorts of like consumers' use of streaming. There's also some increases that are happening there.
Yeah. Here it says that it rose 33% compared to 2017. So that's a huge jump, like 33% more revenue than 2017.
Right. And what's interesting here, these are paid subscriptions. So in the opening of this program, we were talking about using YouTube, right? And YouTube does not fit into this model of paid subscriptions, I'm imagining, Josh.
No. So YouTube uses a different model to make income, and that's off of watching ads, right? There are a number of other streaming services that also use that model. One of the ones that I use is Spotify. Spotify does allow you to pay for a streaming service, which means that at that point you don't have to listen to any of the ads anymore.
Right.
But for me, usually I don't mind dealing with the ads. A lot of times when I listen to Spotify, I have it on in the room, so it isn't too terribly distracting, as opposed to like going in my headphones where if people were pumping advertisements into my ears, it might be a little bit more distracting.
Right.
So there's an option there to do a streaming service that it's not paid. But here's what it's saying is for people who opt for those streaming services like Spotify or Apple Music or Google Music, that more people are paying for those services.
So people are cashing in, they're paying for this and not having to deal with the ads, which I could imagine would be nice if sort of ads bother you or if you want to just have a continuous stream of music to listen to. And as we're talking about percentages, and percentages are a helpful way of tracking growth. But sometimes looking at the hard numbers is helpful to really see, how much money is being generated.
Yeah, it's actually quite a bit of money. Here it says that streaming services collected $4.7 billion in revenue. And that's, like, if you look at that number compared to what it was in 2014, $3.5 billion, it's a big jump. And actually, what is actually very interesting here is it looks like streaming is helping the music industry continue to survive. Because a couple years back, a lot of people were very worried about the future of the music industry because people were just not buying CDs anymore. And then with streaming, it provides artists another good avenue to make money.
Right. I know that this is kind of the constant question, especially, the music industry. I feel like the music industry of many different kinds of industries has a lot to deal with in terms of technological changes. It seems like as technology changes, the whole model for how you sell and distribute music changes.
Well, so going from a time when the only way to really get music was either to listen to it on the radio or to buy an entire album, so an entire CD or an entire record, to being able to buy individual songs on something like iTunes, to being able to stream music for free by just listening to some ads really does change. I mean, that's changed the industry quite a bit, especially over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I think within just a short 20 years, there's been a whole sort of shakeup in how the industry works, how it's distributed, and what we're actually purchasing. I just remember being a kid and getting like my first CD. I was like 12. It was the Pokemon Master CD. It was amazing.
I feel actually really old because my first music experience was not CDs.
Oh.
My mother had vinyl records. We had vinyl records at home. And then the first piece of music I went out and bought is probably like Phil Collins or Mariah Carey, and it was actually in a cassette tape.
You had a cassette tape?
I had cassette tape. How about you, Josh? Did you ever buy cassette tapes?
I did, actually. So I also grew up with a lot of vinyl records in the house, and later on in life I also became a collector of vinyl records. But my first memory of buying my own album was a cassette tape as well.
Yeah. Josh, you kind of strike me as the type of person that would potentially give a friend a mixtape.
I did a lot of mixtapes when I was younger. So that was one of the nice things about cassette tapes is that you could record your own blend of songs on the tapes and then give it to somebody else.
Right. So there's always this kind of, here are my favorite songs all on one tape and you give it to somebody else. It might be something romantic or,
or
rock
something
songs
sort of like an interesting sampling of like your favorite rock songs. Something to drive along with, right? To kind of have like a soundtrack while you're driving, all sorts of different things. For some reason, it didn't quite seem the same with CDs.
No.
Right? So you could always burn your own mixed CD, but for some reason, it didn't have the same sort of feel to it. I'm not sure why.
I don't know. There's something very personal about mixtapes. I remember because, I have an older brother, so he was really into like cassettes and mixtapes and all of that. So it's a little different. Now, there's been tremendous output from the artist community that's actually fueled this growth, I think.
Yeah, because streaming actually gives more artists a chance to break out. Like here at the bottom of the paragraph, we see that rejuvenation in the industry means more opportunities to find and break new artists for fans to enjoy. So basically, what is rejuvenation? Rejuvenation is just you make something more effective or more modern.
Right.
And how do you do that? You introduce new methods and ideas. And streaming here is the new method of delivery for music.
Sometimes when I see rejuvenation, I often think of sort of bringing new life into the industry as well.
Right. So bringing new life or bringing maybe even a youthful energy, something like that. So it, and I think recently in the last 10 years or so, we've really seen that too. For anyone who has ever been interested in being a recording artist, one of the big difficulties was the amount of money it took in order to record and then produce your own album or CD and then have that distributed. So it took a lot of money in order to do that. And that's usually why artists would need to sign some sort of recording deal. So they would have a recording label that can help pay all that money in order to get music produced and then put out. But With streaming services, it's a little bit different because you still have to have a good recording, but you don't have to pay for 10,000 CDs or a million
Right.
CDs or even albums in order to be able to sell the music.
Yeah, I think of like the overhead that used to be associated, sort of the overall costs for just producing the CD. And like you're mentioning, you can't just say like, I'm going to make an album and I don't have too much money, so I'm just going to produce 500 CDs. You're usually talking much bigger numbers.
Right. And so because now you can stream your music, it really does, say, open the door or create a lot of opportunity for more artists. And that's, I think, what this sentence is trying to say here, this tremendous output or the tremendous amount of new music that's being put out there, produced from the artist community is really kind of helping this sort of, here they say a historic milestone of 50 million subscriptions to music services, meaning that's sort of a number that's worth noting, right? Because it's a big number and the first time that it's been made.
And what's interesting about this, this is sort of a trend that's been ongoing. They were mentioning here that it's the third consecutive year of double-digit growth. So 3 years in a row, they've been experiencing this level of growth. And to reach that 50 million, I don't know, it sort of feels like it mentions here, a milestone or sort of like a landmark kind of number. And a lot of this comes from, just as Rebecca was mentioning, the sort of rejuvenation in the industry. And here, you have those opportunities for those new artists. And what I find interesting is like to find and break new artists for fans. This idea of breaking a new artist.
It's a little bit like sort of breaking out, right?
Right.
And so it means to bring people's attention or notice to new music.
Yeah, so you sort of break a new artist. You're not actually breaking a person. You're sort of breaking it to the rest of us so we know who this artist is. And now we've gotten a sense of sort of the trend of the growth. Now we can actually look at how the music industry has changed and the specific kinds of changes that distribution, the physical objects, the kinds of changes that have led to the moment we are at now with our second reading.
The numbers. The RIAA's latest report shows that 75% of music industry revenue now comes from various forms of streaming. Physical sales of vinyl records continue to increase, up 8% to $419 million, the highest level since 1988. Sales of other physical media, however, continue to fall. Revenue from CD sales was down almost 34% to $698 million. Music video sales fell more than 28% to $28 million. And sales of other physical media, including cassette tapes, were down nearly 22% to $9.6 million. Glazier's statement said that although music revenue totaled just under $10 billion, a significant rebound from a low of $6.7 billion in both 2014 and 2015, the industry was back only to a level close to what it was in 2007, when the total was $10.7 billion. Stream ripping and a lack of accountability for many big tech companies that drive down the value of music remain serious threats as the industry strives for additional growth, Glazier said.
So now we're going to dig into the numbers. And so the RIAA, their latest report, showed that 75% of music industry revenue now comes from various forms of streaming. So there are various kinds of streaming services. It's not just Spotify, it's Spotify and all the other services that are kind of similar to that offer sort of streaming music. But this article doesn't just stop at streaming music. We also look at physical sales. Now, physical sales deals with the objects, kind of like the CDs, the vinyls, and all of that.
Right, and that's what we grew up with. Like, of course, the first one, first physical product of music was vinyl records in the past. A lot of people had a record player at home, and they had vinyl records that they played. But vinyl records continue to increase. It's interesting. Even now, people are still buying vinyl records. And part of the reason is the sound. Maybe Josh can get into that a little bit later, why he collects vinyl records. But a lot of music people who love music, say that the sound from a vinyl record, you just cannot replace it in other forms of music, like whether that is true or not. So vinyl records, the sales continue to be good. It actually increased by 8%.
Which is just incredible. And I think it's true, like there's something about the sound quality, right, Josh?
There is definitely something about the sound quality of vinyl records. The act of making a vinyl record takes a sound wave and makes it into a physical motion, and then which is the needle that goes back and forth and cuts a groove into the record. And then the reproduction of that sound just recreates that physical motion, and it adds sort of a warmth and a brilliance and kind of a range of sound that some people feel gets lost when something has been converted from that type of sound into a digital form of it or a digital copy. But the nice thing about vinyl records is that it's a full experience. So it's something that's very heavy, that fits in your hand, that's a big size. Usually the covers are also fantastic artwork. And so it's not just the experience of listening to the music, but it's the experience of taking the vinyl, bringing it out, putting it onto the record player, playing the music and really enjoying it, and then also having to turn the record over when you want to listen to the other side as well.
Right.
So it's a very unique kind of physical experience as well as something to listen to. And it really, I think, makes you kind of like stop and really enjoy the music in a different way than just like, putting it on your phone and walking around. But I think it's also very interesting that this number is something that's increasing, because what it says here is that the majority of sales now are not albums. They're not people buying records or buying CDs or even cassette tapes, because people are streaming most of their music now, which is a big switch. It's a huge, huge switch.
It's a really significant switch. And, here we look at some of the other kinds of revenues that come in. So, of course, they mentioned CD sales, which are down almost 34%.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And still there's some revenue coming from it. But, most of us now listen to music, I think, on computers.
That's true.
Newer computers don't even have CD drives.
That's a really good point. First of all, most young people don't have CD players at home.
Right.
And then if your laptop or computer doesn't have a CD drive, then you can't even listen to CDs anymore.
Some of the other things that get mentioned here, we talk about music video sales. This was something I didn't even realize you could buy.
Well, it's for people who once upon a time really enjoyed buying their music through things like iTunes. Right? So there would be some artists that produced videos that would go with their music tracks, and you could purchase the entire thing, the video as well as the song, and be able to listen to it on your computer. But that's not, I think, probably for everyone, because people like Joe or myself or Rebecca enjoy listening to those videos for free on YouTube.
Right. We're the wrong market.
Exactly.
Now, they mentioned other physical media. We talked about cassette tapes, which unsurprisingly also down nearly 22%. But we go into our next paragraph. So
I just want to note that I'm completely surprised that anyone is saying
exactly.
This is
9.6 million. Where are those people?
I have no idea. And honestly, I think that's a good place to pause before we move on. Just the idea that someone out there is buying cassette tapes. Really fascinating.
It could be a 70-year-old somewhere who really just enjoys music and never went digital.
That's true. Sometimes in some areas of the United States, you will find bargain bins.
Yes.
Where they just have a big, huge pile of old cassette tapes you can buy. There used to be a time, and maybe still in some places, there are areas in the United States where you would go to a gas station, and most gas stations are connected with convenience stores in the States. But there are certain gas stations that are on highways that kind of serve people who have to travel long distances. And when you go to pay for your gas, there would be a collection of cassette tapes next to the cash register, so you could buy like a greatest hits of 70s rock, or country rock, right? But one of the things that it doesn't list here that might fall into the cassette tape category are 8-track tapes. So 8-track tapes are old technology before cassette tapes that were a little plastic box that had an 8-track inside that you would put as a cartridge into a player. Those also have really great sound to them, and there are a lot of people who also collect those now.
So there's a whole just gamut of media, and most of them are down, and a lot of this now is taken up by streaming music. And, oh man, 8-track tapes, that's something I haven't thought about in a really long time. Now, Glazier's statement, going back to that, he's talking about how music revenue totaled just under $10 billion. So this is a significant rebound. It's a good bounce back from a low $6.7 billion in both 2014 2015. And what's interesting here is actually the industry is almost back to where it was in 2007.
Yeah, which is interesting. You would think that maybe the revenue is supposed to be a lot more than 2007, but if you look at it, it's just only 10.7 billion, which is like after all these years, the revenue is still about the same.
Right. And part of this comes from the fact that, in 2007, there was a really sharp decline where you're having digital CDs. The digital music was just starting to grow with Apple Music.
And people also forgot about the fact that CDs don't last for forever. So people are like, why would I buy a CD?
Right. And of course, so digital music just getting more popular, CDs dropping down. But now there's another issue where stream ripping and a lack of accountability is kind of another problem here. So, companies aren't necessarily being responsible for their practices, right?
Yeah, here you would have two things. You have individuals who are taking streaming music and recording it and then using it without having to pay or listen to ads. And then you have big tech companies who, like Google or Apple, who are offering streaming services but then aren't paying artists for the amount of listens that they get.
Right. So there's a whole other kind of issue here that will affect the music industry's growth. But overall, it seems like streaming is starting to lift that industry up.
Yeah, it's allowing the industry to continue to make money where former ways of making money is not working anymore. And music really is leading the way on many fronts. I mean, which we'll discuss tomorrow. We'll talk more about movies and TV. Music almost always leads the way. Whatever the music industry, the formats or whatever the delivery, often movies, TV, video will follow. After that as well.
And I think with that, we have a good point to end, and we invite you to join us tomorrow as we continue this discussion about a streaming revolution into the film industry. I've been your host, Joe.
This is Josh.
Rebecca.
Saying goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.